Itch it up, my selector.
Due to some violent content, parental discretion is advised.
I know you gonna dig this.
Happy Saturday. It is Saturday, January the 18th, and it is another edition of Sucker Punch with Joe Habib and yours truly, Maestro Amilcar. We're here to talk the big fight. Well, at least it's a big fight, Joe, in England. I don't know how big it is globally, but I know what people over there in Manchester, in London, in Birmingham, and in various parts of that country, Brighton, of course, are probably very much looking forward to this fight that has been announced. It is set to take place. It is, of course, the fight between the sons of living legends, Chris Eubank Jr. is set to take on Conor Benn. I guess this is for the IBO, the very prestigious IBO middleweight championship of the world. I've been hot and cold on this fight myself. I think the drama about this fight outside of the ring, Joe, is probably going to be better than the fight inside the ring, because I've always considered this to be quite a mismatch fight. But I'm going to throw it to you, Joe. Talk to me about Chris Eubank Jr. taking on Conor Benn. I believe, again, it's for the IBO middleweight championship of the world. Go for it.
You know, a lot of times we look at these fights and we're skeptical, right? We say, what's the significance of this fight? You got a welterweight moving up to fight a middleweight who doesn't even really have a major title, right? And there's other fights for both men out there where each man could win a major title in their respective divisions. So in terms of significance, yes, there's better and bigger fights in boxing for them in regards to people like us who follow the sport in depth. But again, you have these events that really aren't for us. This fight isn't really for us. This fight is for the mainstream, right? And the way it's going to be promoted and the way the backstory is being talked about, this is more about the backstory than the fight itself, right? And that's what the big selling point for this fight is. And as the fight does get closer, I always go back to the Mayweather-McGregor fight where Eric and I, when that first fight was announced originally, we were so against it. We just weren't enthusiastic about it at all. We didn't feel as though that fight warranted attention from us. But as the promotion went on, they sold it to us. And that's how I kind of feel about this. All the drama behind the scenes, this turned into like a reality show. And Chris Eubank really knows how to sell a fight. Chris Eubank Jr., really knows how to sell a fight. The way he talks, just his demeanor, I get a kick out of him. I know he's not everyone's cup of tea, but I like Chris Eubank Jr. I don't dislike Conor Benn, but I'm more of a fan of Chris Eubank Jr. just because of his personality, the way he kind of carries himself. And obviously, The resume has a lot of holes in it. Did he live up to his expectation? He's nowhere near what his father was in terms of accomplishments. We know that. And this is not to disparage the guy, but he's made a lot of money. He's talked his way into some big money fights. And win, lose, or draw, he did say he's going to fight Erislandy Lara for an official title, right? I think it's the WBA middleweight title, if I'm not mistaken. So he will officially fight for a middleweight title for the first time in his career after this fight, according to him, win, lose, or draw. So I think the future looks bright for Chris Eubank Jr. And I'm starting to warm up to this fight, Maestro. I'm starting to warm up to it.
Yeah, absolutely. Hit the like button, as our main man MAW has said. Hit the like button if you're new to the channel. Hit the subscribe button and consider joining a channel, because Joe provides great coverage and analysis of the great sport of boxing here on Ringside Reporter Live. Make sure you also tune in to the flagship show on this channel, which takes place 6 p.m. Eastern Sundays. That's 3 p.m. Pacific time, 11 p.m. if you're out there in the UK, London time. I'm going to go to a quick interview here on the IFL TV channel, Joe. And it's Chris Eubank Jr. talking about this fight. We're going to see a little bit about what you were talking about, you know, the talking skills of Chris Eubank Jr. And Joe, check Telegram for me for a moment, if you can, please, as I show this video featuring Chris Eubank Jr. Let's have a quick look.
How are you, mate?
I am jet lagged, but aside from that, I'm beautiful. I'm happy. I'm excited. I'm back in England. I'm cold, but this is a great event, so I'm happy to be here.
Where does jet lag rank in your top 5 problems in life, Eubank? Come on.
These days it's massive. It seems like every time I'm in front of a camera, I've just got off a plane. I just flew in from Dubai this morning. It's part and parcel of the job.
I don't know how long we got, so let's cut straight to the chase. Is this fight happening with Conor Benn or not? Come on, give us something. Are you starving us of this fight because of your split demands?
It's happening. We are extremely close to finalizing contracts and details on when and where and for how much. We're close. So I hope that there's an announcement within the next week or two.
Who's buckled here then? Who's giving? Not buckled, but who's give a little bit? Because you were adamant you weren't going to do the fight unless it was 55-45 in your favour. So something somewhere has got to give. Who's given?
Let's just say that, thank Allah for His Excellency Turkey Al-Sheikh.
You're a straight talker. What's happened? Come on. Chris, what's happened?
Turkey happened.
Turkey happened. That's a fair comment.
It's because I'm not buckling. I'm not giving it any inch, especially not to that guy. So what needs to be done, or what needed to be done to make the fight happen, has been done by the Saudis, and we're close.
Can you tell us where the fight is going to take place? UK or Saudi Arabia? Well, you're not allowed to say that, really.
It should be in the UK. I've made it expressly clear that I want it in the UK, and I think all parties agree. So I would be surprised if it's not.
What happened?
And there's a little bit of Chris Eubank Jr., Joe, talking about this fight. And the interviewer there, Coogan Cassius of IFL TV, raised one of the principal stumbling blocks to this fight happening. Let's go back a couple years now, when it's actually more than a couple years, when the first fight didn't happen. It was because Conor Benn tested positive for what was a banned substance. The fight was canceled at the last moment. Since there's been a lot of back and forth on social media. Conor's been serving a long suspension. We've discussed that multiple times on this channel and on my own. Flash forward now, and Chris Eubank Jr. was insisting on a 55-45 financial split. He said that there was no way this fight was going to take place unless there was a 55-45 split. They were going at it on social media. After the fight was announced, Chris Eubank Jr. was talking about the fact that there's going to be a rehydration clause for this fight. Talk to me about those two conditions, and given those two concessions that are being reported, one from one side, one from the other, who was driving the harder bargain here, and who ended up coming out on top? If you want to look at it that way, one or the other, go for it, Joe.
What I suspect happened is because we don't know for sure like what the split is,
Yeah.
right? But we kind of get the sense that the rehydration clause is in the contract. I think Eddie Hearn confirmed it, and I also think that Chris Eubank Jr. with the tweet kind of admitted that as well. So um, I suspect that in order for Conor Benn to have gotten something, which seems he got a concession made with this rehydration clause. I'm sure that Chris Eubank Jr. also achieved a concession from the Conor Benn side, and I do suspect, and again, this is my opinion, I don't know factually, but I do suspect that in order for the 55-45 to be acceptable, Chris Eubank Jr. had to give something up to Conor Benn, and that seems to be the rehydration clause. That's just my opinion. I'm leaning towards that. And it goes back to, I remember back in the day when Marvin Hagler and Sugar Ray Leonard were signed to fight in that big mega fight back in 1987 in April. Sugar Ray Leonard wanted a lot of things. He wanted the bigger ring. He wanted a 12-round fight instead of a 15-round fight. And back at that time, there were still 15-round fights. I believe there was a situation with gloves too. I'm not 100% sure with that, but there were some concessions that Marvin Hagler had to make, and in response to those uh, concessions that Hagler made, what had happened was he got more money. So this reminds me of this situation. So I'm guessing, and this is just me speculating, because a negotiation works both ways. It's give and take. If you're not going to just get everything you want, you're going to have to give something to the other side in order to get some of the things you want. And in this case, I do believe, just like in the Leonard Hagler situation, Hagler, uh, had to give up those things, and as a result, he got more money. So Leonard had to pay for the things he wanted. He couldn't just ask for them automatically and get them. He had to give up some money to Hagler in order to get them. And it seems to me in this case that we have a similar situation with Chris Eubank Jr. and Conor Benn. I think he was so hell bent and adamant about getting the 55-45, the extra 10%. So now he had to pay for it, and it also reminds me too of Devin Haney versus Ryan Garcia, where there was the weight stipulation in there, and Devin Haney had the choice to either take that fight or not take that fight because Ryan Garcia was over the weight, and Devin Haney was so adamant and he was so braggadocious about during the final press conference and the week leading up to the fight interviews. Oh well, I'm getting paid. He was so happy that he was getting paid. I think it was want to say it was like 500,000 a pound or two. I think it was 200,000 a pound or five. I can't remember, but he was getting paid a substantial fee from Ryan Garcia because Ryan Garcia blew the weight, and he was bragging and he was happy about it.
It was $500,000 a pound.
So yeah. So he actually ended up getting like I think another extra $1 million or 1.5 million. I think Ryan was 143, I believe, or something like that. So he ended up getting like I think $1.5 million in restitution, basically, right?
Yeah,
so,
I was actually there that day, Joe, when they made the agreement. It was
correct.
Right at the press conference at the Barclays.
Yeah. So again, sometimes you get the money, but was that $1.5 million that he got in return for Garcia being over the weight limit? Was it worth it? Because after the fight, all he did was complain about Garcia being over the weight. So you can't have it both ways. You were bragging about how smart you were and how great of a business deal this was for you to squeeze an extra $1.5 million out of Ryan Garcia, but ultimately you used it as an excuse for losing the fight. So will this come back to bite Chris Eubank Jr. in the butt in the end, being so adamant about that 10% and having to give up this concession to Conor Benn with the rehydration clause? And again, this is just me speculating that this was give and take negotiations, and he had to probably give that up in order to get what he wanted. We have these situations, right? We have these situations where, people get paid, to make a concession. But is it going to be worth the dollar amount in the end if you end up losing the fight? That's you
Yeah,
have to
well,
have these legitimate questions.
this is the tweet here from Chris Eubank Jr. I'm going to pull it up so people can see it. This was a couple days ago. He said, just so you all know, these two rats at Conor Nigel, which is Conor Benn, and at Eddie Hearn, are now trying to enforce a rehydration restriction on me to make the fight. They talk a big game, but when it actually comes down to it, just a pair of kittens. I'm sure he meant something else instead of kittens there, but look, it's an odd one, right? Because you've got a guy who hasn't really established himself as the best middleweight in the world. There are obviously other middleweights out there. Even in the UK, you got Hamza Shiraz, although he doesn't have a title. You've got Carlos Adames, who does have a title. You've got Janibek, who does have a title. And, of course, you have Erislandy Lara, who has a title. And Chris isn't fighting them. We saw a comment here earlier, saying that from MAW, saying that essentially this isn't his first choice of opponent for either fighter. Then you've got Conor Benn, who I think has done absolutely nothing of real note as a welterweight, has looked average to say the least. I mean, he looked mediocre. I think that's an appropriate word in his fights at 154. Why am I to believe that he should be competitive at 160? For me, this rehydration clause is almost a way to sell it to the fans more than it is to give Conor Benn any kind of an advantage here. I mean, because you can sell it, well, he's not really a middleweight, but there is a rehydration clause, so it's going to be a little bit more competitive than you think it might be. And yeah, there's a lot of bad blood here. Yeah, there's a lot of beef. You combine that with the rehydration clause, and boom, we have a competitive fight. Go for it, Joe. I saw you wanted to chime in.
Yeah, here's the problem with the rehydration clause. And we had a very similar discussion, if you remember, back with the Tank Davis, Ryan Garcia situation. We complained about the rehydration clause because every time there's a rehydration clause, you open up the door for that asterisk if that fighter who requested the rehydration clause wins, because there's always that whataboutism at the end of it, right? What if there wasn't the rehydration clause? Did the rehydration clause affect the fighter who was the heavier guy, the bigger guy? Normally, that's going to be the disadvantaged fighter in these situations. So if Conor Benn's talking all that rah-rah, like, oh, I'm going to do this, that, and the third, and I'm going to knock you out, whatever. If you're so confident, then why would you need a rehydration clause then? If you're so much better, if you think that you're going to win in such impressive, decisive fashion, then just the sheer thought and the mere act of you asking for this rehydration clause, it shows that you feel that this guy has an advantage over you, and this fight is not even, as you say, or you're not the overwhelming favorite, as you say, because if you were, you wouldn't be asking for a rehydration clause. That would be like Usyk asking for a rehydration clause against Fury, even though it's a heavyweight fight. Like, again, there's going to be situations.
That might have actually helped Fury.
yeah. There's going to be situations where you're going to be the smaller man in there, right?
Yeah.
So if you're so much better than Chris Eubank Jr., then why would you need a rehydration clause? Let me ask you this: did Sugar Ray Leonard ask for a rehydration clause against Donnie Leland, even though he did kind of drain him to 168? Did he ask on top of that for a rehydration clause? No, because he thought he was the better fighter. He thought his skills would carry the day against the much bigger man, Donnie Leland. Even bringing Donnie Leland down to 168.
Yeah, that wasn't fair to Donnie Lalonde.
It wasn't fair to Donnie Lalonde. It was a cheap way to win 2 world titles. As much as I love Sugar Ray Leonard, he's my favorite fighter of all time. I can admit that. But he was still the smaller man, even with bringing Donnie Lalonde down to 168. You could see the size difference on the night of the fight. So that is always going to be there at the end of the day. There's going to be that asterisk. If Conor Benn wins, what about that rehydration clause? Did that affect Chris Eubank Jr.? Because the catch weight in the first fight, when they both were training to make that first fight before, obviously, it was scrapped because of the positive PED test from Conor Benn's side. But Chris Eubank Jr. did say after that fight, when he was going into the fight with Liam Smith, that having to make that catch weight really affected him and drained him, and there was a residual effect from that camp going into the next camp. So will this be a problem, having to make two weights for one fight? That's why I hate rehydration clause. I hate that rule with the IBF. You're essentially you're saying that you're trying to make the sport safer, but by not letting someone rehydrate to their natural weight and forcing someone to not only have one weigh in, to not only have to drain themselves twice, but you're asking them to deplete and drain themselves one time. You're asking them to do it twice, which is ridiculous. So you may be, so if you're going to help one fighter or try to solve one problem and at the same time create another problem, then what are you really doing there? So having the second weigh-in, yeah, that's great. You're limiting the unfair size advantage, right? But you're also putting the other guy who's bigger at a disadvantage. And let's just look at history. Let's look at empirical data. We've done this before, right? We've looked at these types of fights where the smaller guy moving up to fight the bigger guy, right? And let's look at history and ask ourselves, how many times has the smaller guy won over
Floyd Mayweather,
over the big guy?
Floyd Mayweather, Oscar De La Hoya, Manny Pacquiao, Oscar De La Hoya, right? Thinking
Sugar Ray
of
Leonard, Marvin Hagler, Sugar Ray
Ray
Leonard, Donna Leland, Roberto
Yeah.
Duran coming up from lightweight. So usually
Another weight training case, Andre Ward against Bad Chad Dawson. Remember, he brought him down to 168.
Yes, and he was essentially the bigger man coming down. So
Yeah.
more often than not, a lot of times when the smaller man moves up and fights the bigger man at a weight that's not natural for the smaller man, he already has the advantage in skill. So a lot of times they're not, like, for instance, Canelo, when he moved up to 175, wanted the Bivol fight because he thought that was the less dangerous opponent. He didn't call out Beterbiev. He called out Bivol because Bivol was thought to have been the smaller guy in comparison to Beterbiev, not as strong as Beterbiev and not as hot as a hitter. So a lot of times when guys move up to the other weight just so they can grab a title,
Roy Jones Jr., John Ruiz.
Yeah, they tend to go
They take on Lennox Lewis.
Yeah, they tend to look for the skill gap to offset their size disadvantage, right?
Absolutely. Before I bring on Lil Penny, who's gracious enough to join us, I want to turn to my friend Gareth A. Davies, who did an interview the other day on the red carpet of the Ring Gala Awards. This is courtesy of Gareth A. Davies, a good friend of mine, and none other than Talk Sport, the outlet there that does a lot of boxing coverage in the UK. Here we go.
You're on the same table as Chris Eubank Jr. tonight, aren't you?
I'm not.
How do you know? Have you checked?
Lee, I'm not on the same table as Eubank, am I? I'll be straight out of it.
Well, he's only a couple of interviews along over there. You had a look or not?
Yeah.
Do you fancy it out on the cobbles tonight? You do, don't you?
Always. I'm always on smoke.
But better at Wembley in front of 90,000 people.
We'll see. I've said yes to the Barrios fight for the WBC world title. I've also said yes to Eubank. So the reality is I'm sitting in a lovely position. Whoever wants it can get it.
And are you waiting for them to make the decision?
I'm waiting for my team to do the rest. I stayed in the gym. I stay ready. Just give me 6 weeks. I'm ready for any of them.
Is there a preference between the two?
I really don't mind. Eubanks or Barrios, it makes no difference to me.
You don't spit so much venom at Barrios.
Less personal, that's all. Less personal.
So what's interesting to me there is, are we to really believe that he was as interested in a Barrios fight for lesser money?
No,
I don't think so.
I don't believe
I
it.
mean, I've been saying this all along. The Eubank fight is good for Conor Benn because when he loses, because he inevitably will lose, he'll have the built-in excuse of, well, I went up 2 weight divisions to fight a guy, and it was a meaningful fight, and blah 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 blah. I mean, what's the excuse if he gets destroyed by Mario Barrios at 147, which, by the way, would have inevitably happened as well because he hasn't fought a guy or beat a guy on the level of Mario Barrios, where Mario Barrios is right now as the WBC welterweight champion of the world. Go for it, Joe, and then I'm going to bring on Lil Penny.
Yeah, both guys have an alibi here. And both guys essentially win, lose, or draw can have a title fight after this fight, right? You have the Arislandi Lara fight, obviously, for Chris Eubank Jr., and then you have the Mario Barrios fight for Conor Benn. And both guys, Conor, if loses, can say, I was a smaller guy. I dared to be great. That whole dared to be great thing, that gets overused so much. And then Chris Eubank Jr. could say, well, the rehydration clause really hurt me. If I go fight Lara and I'm able to rehydrate properly, you'll see a much better version of myself. So both guys have the same situation. Essentially, both guys have the title fight. Both guys have the alibi. So it's interesting. I think both guys have an out here.
And there you have it.
What's going on, you handsome bastard?
It's Lil Penny, New Zealand's very own from down.
Hey, I do agree with you guys that sometimes, when the smaller man goes up in weight, most of the time he ends up winning. But then I thought to myself, all those guys that you mentioned, Mayweather, Pacquiao, De La Hoya, Ray Leonard, Roy Jones Jr., those guys are all-time greats. Like, yeah, they probably would win, but Conor Benn is not an all-time great. Eubank isn't.
Can I interject for 1 second, Little Penny? I apologize for cutting you off. Let me even add to that point. As I said earlier, there's usually the smaller guy usually has a higher skill level than the bigger guy he's fighting when he moves up in most cases. Not all, but most.
Unless it's an undercard fight against the prospect.
Yeah,
there's
no. In my opinion,
weight divisions.
In my opinion, again, we can say what we want about Chris Eubank Jr. He's, in my opinion, still the higher skilled, more experienced fighter in this contest. So it's not the case of the smaller man moving up being the more skilled fighter. I would argue he's the less skilled fighter, also moving up, fighting the bigger guy. So this really exemplifies the good big man beating the average or decent little man. I don't want to diminish the guy, but I have been less impressed with Conor Benn than I have been with Chris Eubank Jr. as of late, in my opinion.
I'd like to make one point too, which is that it seems like this is a new trend that's picking up some momentum, this whole rehydration enforcement thing. Now, with a fight like this, or with the Tank Davis-Ryan Garcia fight, it was a contractual stipulation, right? But what we've been hearing with this fight between Shakur and Kid Austin is now the WBC is instituting rehydration clauses for the safety of the fighter, quote unquote. And their rule is you can't weigh in more than 10% above the contracted weight the day following the weigh-in. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that situation, Joe, where it's not a contractual stipulation as it is in the case of this Eubank Jr. Benn fight and with the Tank Davis-Ryan Garcia fight, but it's something that's being imposed on the fighters by a sanctioning body.
Well, it's the same thing. I have the same criticism for the WBC as I would have for the IBF. I think that in an attempt to solve a potential problem, you create another one. Now, when they did the next day weigh-ins, saying, oh, well, we want these fighters to rehydrate properly, what you essentially did was you gave these guys a false sense of security that they could walk around at any weight when they're not signed to fight, and they can come down from a ridiculously high weight because they have the extra time to rehydrate and they'll be strong. But again, this is you could argue this is opinion, but a lot of people will tell you it's fact. A lot of medical people, after depleting yourself and losing a lot of electrolytes and vital vitamins and nutrients and minerals, it's going to take you more than 36 hours to replenish everything. It usually takes upwards of, depending on how bad you deplete yourself, it could take upwards of 72 hours to sometimes maybe even, 4 days, 5 days, right? So again, you gave these guys a false sense of security, and you give them a license to deplete themselves to crazy levels, and now they think they could do this, and it's going to be advantageous to them because they'll be the bigger man on the fight. But a lot of times, also when you put such a great amount of weight on in a short period of time, your body that doesn't have enough time to adapt to that weight, you become sluggish. So this is the problem with a lot of these sanctioning bodies. They make these decisions. They don't really look at the science. They don't really do research on whether or not it's actually the right thing to do or the beneficial thing to do for the fighters involved. And in this case, the WBC going along with the IBF, not a fan of it. Not a fan of it. Not a fan of the IBF doing it. Not a fan of the WBC doing it. So I don't think it's a good thing, and I'm against it.
What are your thoughts on same day weigh-ins versus day before weigh-ins, Joe? Because that's another debate that's been ongoing in the sport for decades now.
I, along with Steve Kim, I am an advocate for same day weigh-ins because
As am I.
guess why? Because you don't have these guys walking around at these crazy weights and thinking they can get it all back in 36 hours, right? So if there are same day weigh-ins, Errol Spence would have been a 154 pounder or a middleweight years ago, right? So these guys would automatically fight in their same, in the same weight classes. And I don't want to go off on a tangent here, just destroying the sanctioning bodies, but has there ever been any scientific evidence to prove that cutting the rounds down from 15 to 12, actually there's been less injuries, less fatalities? I haven't seen any data to support that either.
Or any
So
peer-reviewed studies that I'm aware of. I'll look into it after the show, but Google Scholar, but I haven't seen any studies
I
on
haven't seen
that.
I haven't seen any evidence to suggest that too. So just making these rules without having any evidence and empirical data or anecdotal anything, right, to support what you're saying, and just picking and making statements out of the air just so you can, validate or justify you doing something. I don't think it means anything, in my opinion. I think has no weight, you know.
Yeah, and Lil Petney, we saw Manny Pacquiao essentially fighting around his walking around weight for much of his career, especially later on in his career. You wanted to chime in there. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, in history, when fighters had catch weights,
Hmm.
it was more because one was 135, 140, the other one was 147. So you meet in the middle to make it fair, right? But then, yeah, I remember Mayweather when he fought Canelo. He should have been at 154, but he made it at 140, 152 catch weight to drain Canelo, right? Because Canelo was making it difficult to make 154 anymore. And then a few years later, Canelo did it too to Amir Khan. He did it the other way, where he was supposed to be at 154, but he made it 155, I think, to be at 160 pounds, or at middleweight, and Amir Khan was at 140. Like people, and then Tank Davis took it to another level where he weaponized when the weigh-in was in. So, for example, if he fought a bigger guy, the weigh-in would be like if the fight was Saturday night, the weigh-in would be Friday night. Whereas if he had the weight advantage, it would be Saturday morning, like instead of the usual. Friday morning instead of the usual Friday afternoon. I agree. I think we should go back to the day of the weight, like what Beebs was saying. That way, it's fair. There's no, because if you're the A side, right, and you have the leverage, you can do what Tank does. You weaponize the rehydration clause, the time of the weigh in, and also the catch weight, which is unfair to the B side.
No, 100%. And I used look. when Joe says the smaller guy usually beats the bigger guy when he's moving up in weight, Joe's obviously referring to big box office, like significant fights, because
skill gap differences too.
Because we also see Tank fighters making careers. I'm looking at Tank Davis right now, off of beating up on smaller guys moving up in weight. Santa Cruz, Yuri Orkis Gamboa. I mean, the list goes on, right? I would argue that David Benavidez has made his career fighting guys that have moved up in weight from lower weight classes, but we won't get into that right now. But of course, I mean, boxing is built on padding your career early on against guys often fighting out of their weight division. When a fighter's at the prospect level and you're bringing him up. So just to be clear, that's not what Joe's talking about. We heard Conor Benn talking about this fight before it was announced with Gareth A. Davies. Here he is with a new haircut only a couple days later talking about this fight after it came to fruition. Here's Conor Benn. Let's have a look. Let's have a listen to Conor Benn discussing this fight. I don't believe a word coming out of his mouth, by the way, but I'd like to hear what you guys think.
How pleased are you, Conor, that we are now here? Some doubted if this day...
Okay, I have no doubt he's pleased about the fight being announced. That much I am sure of. I mean, he is going to be handsomely paid. But I was talking about what's going to happen in the ring. Here we go.
Would come. What are some of the emotions going through your mind?
Yeah, the emotions are high for sure. I just can't wait to get in there and splatter his Satsuma head all over the canvas. Personally.
How easy was this to make when push did come to shove? We knew.
Damn, you couldn't do this against Pete Dobson. You couldn't do this in the fight against the Mexican guy. Sorry, I don't remember his name off the top of my head. But we're supposed to believe that you're going to do this against Chris Eubank Jr. at 160? I mean, come on.
It was a fight that His Excellency wanted to see, but how were negotiations from your experience?
The reality is, I let my team, a big thank you to Keith and Lee for getting this fight done. I've just left it to the team and trusted them to get the deal done. The reality is they didn't bother me with it. I kept seeing news reports, I kept seeing, fake news, true news. The reality is I stayed in the gym, stayed working, and I agreed to Eubank, I agreed to Barrios. I was under the impression for a long time that I'd be fine for the WBC world title.
No, you weren't.
But this one's definitely more personal, for sure.
So he goes on to talk about he's going to take his head clean off his shoulders, quote unquote, and a bunch of other nonsense. I don't know. I have a tough time trusting guys when they're giving interviews wearing sunglasses. Myself, Joe, I don't know what you think about that. Maybe he's hiding his lying eyes. But again, and I pulled up the guy's name here, Rodolfo Orozco. Didn't know much about Rodolfo Orozco before that fight. Haven't heard much of him since that fight, but he didn't take Rodolfo's head clean off of his shoulders, right? Nor did he splatter Pete Dobson's brains all over the ring at the Cosmopolitan in Las Vegas when he fought him. So I don't know. I mean, is this helping sell the fight, Joe? Like, what? Because anybody who knows boxing isn't believing any of this.
The problem with this fight also, if you're breaking it down from a stylistic standpoint and you're doing the X's and O's, right? We know Conor Benn is a swarmer. He's a seek and destroy fighter. So moving up and fighting the bigger guy, he's not going to out-finesse him. He's not going to out-box him, so to speak. His game is an aggression game. And Chris Eubank Jr. is a big puncher. Even fighting guys the same size, bigger, even bigger than him, possibly, he can knock out anyone with one shot. Regardless of you want to criticize him and his level of opposition and who he's lost to and who he's beat, whatever, he's a big puncher. He's starched guys with one punch, right? So you're moving up and fighting the bigger guy, but you're fighting a guy who can punch and who could also box a little bit. Like he's a little crafty when he wants to be. He could be very methodical, and he could be very cagey, boxing from the outside, moving, sticking and moving a little bit. He doesn't just go out there all the time and just be overly aggressive. He'll let the fight develop. He'll pick and prod from the outside. He'll create and wait for mistakes to be made. He's a good counter puncher, right? So I think you have a guy who stylistically will play right into Chris Eubank Jr.'s hands. He loves these guys that come right at him. He loves these guys that are not hard to find, right? He loves these guys that are not going to be excessively mobile in terms of fighting on the perimeter and circling and going in and out. Like Conor Benn goes in one direction and one direction primarily only. And I just don't think stylistically this is a great fight for Conor Benn.
I know stylistically it's not a great fight for Conor Benn. And I mean, he couldn't use that kind of one-way ambush style to much great effect against journeymen, Joe. Like I've literally seen Pete Dobson fight twice live since that fight. No disrespect to Pete Dobson, but Pete Dobson is a journeyman, right? And he went the full distance with Conor Benn. And now Conor Benn's going up 6 additional pounds, taking on a guy who's fought Billy Joe Saunders, Avni Yildirim. I mean, bigger dudes with skills too, by the way. Like, does anybody here actually think that Conor Benn is a more skilled fighter than Billy Joe Saunders? I don't. And Billy Joe Saunders is a lot bigger than Chris Eubank. Sorry, than Conor Benn. Lil Penny, you wanted to go for it. Here you go.
Yeah, I agree with Beebs. I do think that Eubanks will probably outbox Ben. He can probably knock him out. If you can knock out Callum Smith, I think that's the right.
Liam Smith.
Liam Beefy Smith.
Yeah,
and you're not going to tell me, not to cut you off, Little Penny. You're not going to tell me that Conor Benn is a better fighter than Liam Smith.
Yeah.
I'm not buying that
either. But if Eubanks for some reason goes back to Roy Jones Jr. and he fights like Roy Jones Jr., well, that's bad news for Eubank and good news for Ben. But I do want to say something.
I don't think it matters. Honestly, he could have Roy Jones. He could have Bomac. I don't know if Bomac's allowed back in the UK because of the Blicky charge that he caught over there. And I know he got released, but is he allowed to fly back over there, Joe?
I'm not sure. I don't think he's going to have Bomac in the corner. I don't think so.
Yeah, Bomac took the hammer over there with him, and that's not allowed over there in the UK. But go for it, Lil Penny.
Yeah, but I think all this talk of who's going to win, blah, 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 rehydration clause, I think this will go away once the press conference starts. Because I don't know if you remember, when you put 2 British fighters where they've got like a rivalry, and Maestro would know this because he's been to Britain, right? Like, for example, with
Amir Khan
and Kell Brook. If anyone watched that press conference, that was one of the best press conferences I've ever seen, where both guys are going at it. David
Hay, Derek Chisora.
Yeah, that's right.
Even Enzo Macronelli and David Hay, or I mean, we could go on and on with these fights. Sorry, go.
Oh, what's his name? Derek Chisora. Remember when someone threw water at him? Chisora and what's his name?
Dillian White.
Yeah, Dillian White. That was classic.
Another one was obviously Groves and Frosh, which at one point was a record for boxing.
The handshake.
Yeah. I mean, British grudge matches are real. But you know what's funny about this? And I don't know, you can disagree, Joe. You can disagree, Lil Penny. Those seem to be like legitimate grudge matches. Yeah. I got a question for you guys. Conor Benn's acting like he's been angry at Chris Eubank Jr., like Chris Eubank Jr. has done him wrong somehow. What the hell did Chris Eubank Jr. do to Conor Benn that's got him so emotional, that's got him so angry? He himself said that he was emotional about this. Emotional for what? There's no reason. You're not in the same division. This is the same guy it's funny because on the one hand, he's calling out a lightweight in Tank Davis. You guys remember that? But on the other hand, he's also calling out a middleweight in Chris Eubank Jr. I don't know. I'm this is inauthentic. But
I think
go
it's
for it.
I think it's because Eubank called him a drug cheat, blah blah. Man, because remember they were supposed to fight, and he started calling him a drug.
Yeah, but
drug
I mean,
cheat,
most
blah
of the
blah
UK
blah.
was calling him a drug sheet.
he was even mad before then because I guess Chris Eubank Jr. he felt was kind of minimizing him as a fighter and stuff. But I mean, he still hasn't really fought. Like who is Conor Benn fought like
He's
that?
only beat one guy of note. I'm sorry, I'm not including Chris Van Heerden. I'm not
Chris
including
Algieri maybe is the
I'm not
biggest name on his
including
record.
Adrian Granados at that point in his career, or Samuel Vargas, or Sebastian Formella. No, it's an aged out Chris Algieri who took a fight for one last payday.
And was never really great at 147 to begin with. He
No,
made
he
his
wasn't.
bones.
He probably
Made his
paid
bones
off
at
his
140.
paid off his mortgage with the fight. Maybe bought some Bitcoin,
But-
which
but
hopefully
this is
surging right now.
But this is the difference between British boxing culture versus American boxing culture. These two guys, Eubank and Benn, no tune-up fights. Haney and Ryan Garcia rematch. There's a tune-up in between. Dude, why? Just go and fight.
We're gonna be talking about that in a moment, but I don't know if there haven't been tune-up fights, bro. Like, was Pete Dobson not a tune-up fight? Was Rodolfo Orozco not a tune-up fight? Like, those were tune-up fights. It's not, how are those not tune-up fights?
Look, we got to learn our lessons from the past. Remember last year, Wilder and AJ fought in the same card?
We're going to be talking about this in detail in the next hour of the show, but what I am going to say is there have been tune-up fights. Camille Zarameta, was that not a tune-up fight? That's Chris Eubank Jr.'s last fight.
I'll take that as a yes.
Yeah, I mean, I understand kind of what you're saying.
That response indicates a yes.
I'm not gonna give the UK boxing scene a pass and say that it's superior to the US boxing scene because they don't do tune-up fights in the UK. What do we call Jermaine Franklin? What do we call?
They have less.
Hold up. What do we call Robert Helenius? What do we call Otto Valine? Those were 3 consecutive AJ fights. I would call all of those tune-up fights.
Yeah, but they have less cherry pick fights though. Like I have noticed in the past that with British boxers, they usually fight the best of the best. Like out there, they don't tend to cherry pick.
Who was Dillian White's last opponent? Wasn't his name Tete? Was he the very best?
No, I'm not talking about just one person. I'm talking in general.
He could have fought Martin Bacoli, right? You're the one who pointed out that he's been avoiding Martin Bacoli. I'm just not buying it. The UK fighters are ducking high-level competition at the same level as the US fighters. I'm just being honest.
I'm going to have to push back a little bit, and I'm going to have to run some interference for Little Penny here. I'm not going to say at the same level. I'm not going to say at the same level.
Okay, maybe not the same level, but
they still do it.
I mean,
it's like comparing the Democrats and the Republicans. Let me get this point in real quick. Let me get this point in real quick. Put the brakes.
Yeah.
It's like when the Republicans and the Democrats criticize each other for having too much money in politics. Yeah, they both do, but one side spent $1.5 billion, the other side spent $300 million. So it's not quite the same thing.
Yeah, I agree. Speaking of what did we call them fights? I forgot the word you used, Little Penny. Tune-up fights. Talk to me about your boy that got knocked out the other day by Jayo Pataya.
Oh yeah. But he was what's it called? He was a late replacement though. He was supposed to fight his mandatory, wasn't he? but he got injured, I think. So
Yeah. What was the response to that knockout in Kiwi land?
nah, man. First of all, Jabata is not even Kiwi. He's
No,
Australian.
but his opponent was David Nika was Kiwi or
Yeah,
is.
but the thing is, yeah, he was supposed to do that anyway because he's a late replacement, man. Like
Okay.
he was supposed to do that. But I do,
So
I do love.
David Nika wasn't getting any love out there in Kiwi land.
No, not really. No one knows him here.
No one was
but,
supporting him. You guys don't support your fighters out there, or what?
no one knows who he is.
I
Anyway,
mean, we had season.
but I do.
No one knows who he is. I heard he gets
I've
schooled when he
noticed
walks the
you
streets
don't
of
really
New Zealand.
support the New Zealand guys, though,
First of
Penny.
all-
You don't support
Oh my
Joseph
God.
Parker. You don't
Boxing
support
is
Joseph
not-
Parker.
Boxing is not popular in New
show some
Zealand
respect, man,
or in
please.
Australia, right?
You pulling for Joseph? Are you pulling for Joseph Parker against?
Yeah, I do. But
Are
I'm just letting you know.
You think he's gonna beat? Do you think he's gonna beat Triple D, Daniel Dynamite Dubois?
You know, he actually might because Daniel Dubois is looking ahead at
I'm
a
picking
Usyk
Joseph
fight.
Parker in that fight, man. I like Triple D, but I'm picking Joseph Parker.
Joseph Parker's on a roll too. Yeah,
On a roll.
Dubois is on a roll, but Joseph Parker's on a roll too. In fact,
Don't underestimate
his
Joseph
role
Parker,
is probably
man.
better. His role is probably better than Dubois. It's just that Dubois has beaten AJ, who's got this he's like he's one of the faces of boxing, right? But Parker's victory against Zhang and Wilder, man, that's pretty good.
Chairman Zhang. You know, I was sitting here thinking after Joe was there running interference for Lil Benny, I don't know if I can give the UK a pass. I'm thinking of the major fighters in the UK, and I'm just seeing a lot of cherry picks, a lot of tune-up fights.
It's the same, bro.
I mean,
not
Tyson Fury and AJ both fought an MMA guy.
Because
mean,
Maestro,
hold on. I mean, is Canelo fighting that kind of guy? I mean, he's the biggest star over here. You know, I mean, you could criticize the Munguia fight, you could criticize the Charlo fight, but it's still not Francis Ngannou.
Okay, but here's the problem. Here's the problem.
He's
Here's
American.
the problem.
And Mexico's in America, and he lives in California. Stop it.
Here's the problem. Canelo
He's an
Alvarez
American.
just fought Edgar Berlanga,
Yeah.
and he put 3 of his title belts on the line while doing it.
Yeah.
That Ngannou fight was basically sold as an exhibition,
Yeah.
and with both Joshua and Fury. These guys are defending their titles in America against guys who have with all due respect,
That's a valid point.
they have no business even being in a title. Berlanga had no business being in
no
a
business being there.
No business being in a title.
Also,
Ngannou's not fighting for
I
titles.
agree. It's like all of the David Benavidez title defenses. I agree with you 100%.
Correct.
Yeah.
Also, we have to take into account that when British boxers, when they don't fight the fight that the British fans want, they put them accountable. They don't support them. For example, like in contrast, it's like when Tank Davis cherry picks his opponents, his fans support it. Like, you know what I mean? They don't put him. They don't make him accountable.
I got into plenty of debates. I got into plenty of debates with AJ fanboys defending the 3 consecutive fights against Franklin, Hellenius, and Otto Wallin. I got into plenty of.
Yeah, but he also fought Usyk twice. Like, come on, man. Like, who's Tank Davis fought?
No, I agree, but I mean, Tank Davis isn't the standard. There's other guys in the U.S. other than Tank Davis. I mean, he's not the only fighter. I mean, if you want to bring up Tank Davis, I'll bring up Bam Rodriguez. You know. So I mean, you want to bring
Rodriguez. Who else you got?
Whoa, I mean that's a valid question.
Who else you got?
David Morrell Jr.
No, you don't. You don't have David Morrell.
Oh, I like that fight. Morrell Jr.
There's not a cherry pick fight for either guy. They're stepping up to the plate.
Yeah, this is
I like
one
that fight.
Now name another fight.
They're stepping up to the plate right now, right? At what I can't really say Bouts in this. Look,
We gotta give Keyshawn Davis
Keyshawn
fighting
Davis.
Dennis Berenchek is
Oh,
a
I'm
good
going to
fight.
that fight. I'm
That's a
looking.
really good fight. We got to give him credit for stepping up.
I agree with it. And to be honest, Shakur takes on all comers. They just don't all want to fight him.
That's
you know,
true.
Shakur Stevenson. He takes on all comers. He wants the big fights. Guys, anything else on the Chris Eubank Jr. Conor Benn fight? I'll ask you guys this. And guys in the chat, we got people in the chat. Hit the like button. If you're new to the channel, hit the subscribe button. If you're not a member, join the channel. It's only a couple bucks a month. You help Joe Habib upgrade his equipment and run his channel. The flagship show with Eric Lorda's must-watch YouTube boxing. It drops every Sunday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific. If you're out in the UK, get that late-night boxing talk in because it starts sharp every Sunday at 11 p.m. London time. In the chat, do me a favor. And by the way, you can use negative numbers because those are valid in math. I know that because I'm a teacher certified. Thank you very much. On a scale of 0 to 10, rate your interest in this fight. 0 to 10. And I'm going to go to Joe. Give me a number 0 to 10. How are you rating your interest in this fight? Be honest now.
6.5.
6.5. There you go. Lil Penny, 0 to 10. How are you rating your interest in this fight?
He's going to say 3.
Before the press conference, which hasn't happened yet, I agree with Joe, around 6. But after the press conference, it will be a 10. Trust me, this fight will be huge. This will be at either the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium or at the Wembley Stadium. Yeah. Probably Wembley, because these two have beef, and there's history with their fathers as well. There's the rivalry of the towns. I think it will be huge in Britain, and I reckon maybe the last week of the fight will catch up to in America. I think it will be huge.
Are you more or less excited than you were for the originally scheduled fight? As the 2.5 years affected your interest in this fight, because we're going on 3 years now from when this fight was originally supposed to take place.
I reckon I'm a bit more excited because, Eubank got knocked out and then he came back, and Benn had his own, fight with the law, and the law meaning his drugs and stuff like that.
Take it easy now. He's not a public enemy here.
But,
Fed's out knocking on his door right now, please.
But yeah, I'm gonna, after this press conference is gonna be fire. These two are gonna go at it. If you thought that Amir Khan and Kell Brook's press conference was really good, this one will go over the top. It will probably be one of the best press conferences we've ever seen, and that will promote the fight. It will ignite the fight. Everyone will be tuning in for it. No one will remember who's bigger, who's smaller, what rehydration clause. No one will remember that.
Well, there you go, guys. Thank you so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. And again, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, consider joining the channel. And if you're watching on demand, drop a comment. Let us know what your thoughts of this fight are. If you're in the UK, are you interested? If you're in the US or other parts of the world, are you interested? I have a feeling that interest in this fight is going to tick up a little bit as we get closer, just as you're saying, Lil Penny. But I got to be honest, as much as I am probably the leading advocate of the IBO title, I always have been since the days of the great Lennox Lewis holding that title, initiating the authentic four-belt era. By the way, yeah, Canadian, British, and Jamaican. He's an international guy, much like myself. He initiated the four-belt era with the IBO, WBC, WBA, right, and IBF back in the day. Later on, the WBO came into effect, and people said that was the four-belt era when Oscar beat Felix Sturm and then unified with B-Hop. But I actually start the four-belt era a little earlier with the great Lennox Lewis because I never rated the WBO title. Funny enough, the WBO title is the title held for many years by Chris Eubank Sr., back when it wasn't really recognized out here in the U.S. Now it is recognized in the U.S., so we'll see what it is. We're going to be talking hour number 2, Penny. You're going to like this one on hour number 2. We're going to be talking about Ryan Garcia, and Devin Haney. They're reported to fight in return bouts on the same card in May. And those might be potential banana skins. And the question is, you were kind of alluding to this, little Penny. Why are they doing these interim bouts? Why aren't they just going straight to what people actually want, which is to see Devin Haney? What did he call it, Joe? Get it back in blood?
Get it back in blood, man.
Right.
Matos Locos forever, Daddy.
There you go. So thanks for tuning in. Again, make sure you check out Ringside Reporter Live every Sunday, 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific time, 11 p.m. late night boxing talk out there in the UK. Head over, use the link, go to my channel, Maestro A. We're going to be doing hour 2 of Sucker Punch coming right up. Thank you very much, everyone.